How do you actually finish a PhD? For many students, this is the most difficult and most stressful part. So in this video, we're going to go through some of the practical and emotional challenges to help you finish your PhD faster, finish to a higher standard, and maybe even enjoy the process. So why is finishing a PhD so difficult? Well, there's the obvious practical side, in that writing a PhD thesis just takes a lot of work. But if that was all there was to it, then it would just be a matter of working hard until it was done. But a lot of students work hard without seeming to get any closer to finishing. And this often comes down to psychology. So if we think about what it means to submit your thesis, it means that everything is in its final fixed form and you can't make any more changes. You can't add any more data. You can't add any more references. You can't change the structure of your argument. Whatever you submit, that's what you have to defend in front of the examiners. This means committing to your content, making irreversible decisions about what you include and how you present it. It also means cutting off all other possibilities. So all the extra work that you could do if you had more time, all the other potential interpretations of your data, all the other references you could cite, all the other areas of theory, all the different ways that you could structure or explain your argument. And making these decisions can be scary because, unlike an undergraduate degree where you take several exams and build up a cumulative grade, in a PhD, everything rests on the contents of that one document. And this pressure or fear of failure or judgment leads many people, consciously or not, to put off these key decisions and leave their options open for as long as they possibly can. But this means that if you have a deadline, you then have to make all of those difficult decisions at the very end when you're under the most pressure. Now, you might be able to pull it all together at the last minute, but it's a very stressful experience and it's unlikely to be your best work. And if you don't have a deadline to force you into making decisions, you can end up stuck in a draining and demoralizing cycle of endless drafts and revisions, wanting to finish, putting in the effort, but never quite being able to make final decisions and commit to your content. So, what can we do? Well, first, let's recognize that avoiding decisions tends to increase stress in the long term. And the counter side to this is that once you make one decision, subsequent decisions tend to get easier because it narrows your choices. And this is a good thing. So with that in mind, we can then start to break down some of the key decisions you need to make. The first of which is deciding what not to do. So very few projects just reach a definitive answer and then stop. There is almost always more that you could potentially do to gather more data or analyze it in different ways. And there are almost always open questions either left over or created as a result of your work. And the more strands of research you've done or begun, the more potential avenues you'll probably see for more work. Now, you will never be able to pursue all of these ideas. So the only way it's possible to finish is to draw a line somewhere between what you're going to include in your thesis and what you're not. And this means letting go of potentially good ideas and leaving some things undone. Now, you might think that this would make your thesis weaker, but this isn't necessarily the case, because adding more can dilute and distract from your best content, while also making it more difficult for you to write and for the reader to make sense of. Whereas deciding not to do certain things allows you to focus and do a better job of the content that you do include. Now, if you're not sure where to draw this line between what to include and what not to, then deciding how much time you're willing to invest can really help. Now, I was quite lucky in this regard because my PhD supervisor set a date when I would no longer be allowed back in the lab. So whatever data I had by that point, that's what I would have to work with. And this was the best thing he could have done because it forced me to prioritize and make difficult decisions about what I would try to finish and what I would have to let go based on the time available. So I had to do a kind of triage where I set a few top priorities that absolutely had to get done. Then there were a few things that would be nice to have if I could get the experiments to work in time, and then some things that were obviously not possible in the time available, so I didn't waste any more time or mental energy on them. And deciding not to do certain things meant that even though I had limited time and had to work hard, I didn't have to rush, and I was able to do the most important tasks to the best of my ability. If you don't have that kind of external deadline, I think it's important to set one for yourself. And if you feel some resistance to doing this or to adhering to a deadline that you set, then I think it's worth thinking about the costs of leaving it open-ended, not making decisions, and not finishing. So these costs could be financial in terms of university fees, which many universities are very happy to keep taking, or in terms of lost earnings, or these costs could be more personal in terms of the effects on your mental or even physical health. And then there's the cost in terms of your time. And this is probably the most valuable resource that we have. And once it's gone, there's no way to get it back. So even if you're not sure about specific decisions in your research, it's worth thinking about how much more time you're willing to invest in your PhD, and then use that as a basis for making subsequent decisions. Then, once you've made those decisions, you've followed through and you've got your final data, of course, we have to turn our attention to writing. And a lot of the common writing advice will tell you to just get all of your ideas down on the page. Then you can start to edit and sort it out once you have a complete draft. They will also tell you, if you're stuck, to just write about something else in order to keep the momentum. Now, there are too many problems with this to go into all of them here, but one of the most damaging is that, again, it allows you to avoid making decisions while you write the initial draft. But then you'll have to go through it all again and take care of all the details, make all the decisions, and deal with all the difficult sections that you previously avoided. But if you've trained the habit of avoiding these difficult decisions, it will actually be more difficult than it would have been if you'd taken care of these things the first time round. So I think it's far better to make some key editorial decisions in advance, thinking about what to include, what to leave out, and the key points that you want to get across, which then allows you to make subsequent decisions about how to structure those points and what details you might need to include. And as a general rule, when you're making these big editorial decisions, you should stick to what you know best and what's most relevant for your project, rather than trying to guess what the examiner might want to see, or just including information to try to show how much you know or how much you've read. And if you stick to what you know, this will be much easier for you to write and much easier for you to defend. Then, the way I advise students to work through the thesis is to start with the introduction and work through each chapter and each section in the order they will be read, and finishing each section to a submittable standard before moving on to the next. By submittable standard, I mean taking care of all the references and formatting and making sure there's an unbroken flow in the text with no gaps or notes to yourself to come back and finish something later. And the reason for starting with the introduction is that this sets the stage, establishing the purpose and motivation for everything else. And if this is unclear, then nothing else will make sense. And then the reasons for working in sequence are that it means that you never have to decide what to work on. And it means you always know what you've already said, which is also important to avoid unnecessary repetition. It also forces you to deal with difficult sections instead of saving them all up for the end. And as for finishing each section to a submittable standard before moving on to the next, well, there are three main reasons for doing this. First, it trains you to take care of these decisions and details instead of avoiding them. You're going to have to do them anyway, so you might as well do them at the first opportunity. Second, some of this work gets easier the more you do it. For example, if you invest time early to get your referencing system working properly from the start, then it's very easy to add references as you go, and certainly much easier than adding all of them at the very end. And third, finishing sections as you go creates a tangible sense of real progress. If you tend to get a section sort of done and then move on, you might have written a lot, but you won't have actually finished anything. And many students I speak to will tell me their chapters are all 70% complete. For some reason, it's always 70. But not a single section of any of those chapters would actually be submittable. And they often underestimate how much work it takes to complete that last 30%. I often think it's a bit like when you move house. So you might think that the large furniture takes the most work, or that it's more or less done once you've moved those things, but it's actually the thousands of tiny items, all of which require some mental effort, all of which require a decision, that are often the most stressful to deal with if you leave them all to the very end. But if you actually finish sections as you go, you can then relax about them, knowing that even if they're not perfect, you could submit them tomorrow if you had to. And the more you write this way, the more complete sections you have, the greater the confidence that you can actually finish the whole thing. It also feels good to overcome the challenge of finishing a section, especially if you initially felt resistant to it. And this makes a big difference in terms of maintaining motivation. Now, because writing a PhD thesis is such a big task, what you do on any given day only has a small effect. So if you have an amazingly productive day, it's only a tiny fraction of everything you need to do. Likewise, if you do nothing today, then there are no immediate negative consequences, and you might be able to convince yourself that you'll make up for it tomorrow. But success or failure are cumulative results of what you do consistently on a daily basis. So it doesn't matter whether or not you feel like working on the thesis, or whether you're distracted, or what excuses your brain comes up with. You have to show up and do the work. As for how much work, well, you can easily work out if you're getting enough done by dividing the amount of time you have by the number of chapters you plan to write. So to make the maths simple, if you have 6 months and 6 chapters, then you have a maximum of 1 month per chapter. And if it takes you a week to write the first page of the introduction, then it's just not going to happen unless you significantly increase your output on a daily basis. This might be by increasing the time spent writing, or by making better use of that time, perhaps by reducing distractions and being more focused and decisive. So when I'm writing, I always block the internet so I can't procrastinate online. I just remove that option. And then I focus on one section of writing, and I will stick with it until it's done. And if I'm going too slowly or overthinking, then I'll often set myself a short-term word count target, say 100 words in the next hour. So not typing as fast as I possibly can without thinking, as some people advise, but just prioritizing speed a little bit more. Now, you can do all of these things, finish and submit your thesis, but you still don't know how the examiner will react or what the result will be. So when I was writing my own thesis, I decided that I didn't care what the examiners thought. I was just going to do the best that I could in the time available. I might fail, but I made the decision that I wasn't going to fail by not putting in the work or by not submitting on time. And if I did fail, then it would be unpleasant, but I would be okay. I trusted in my ability to cope with whatever happened. And this freed me up to just do the work without fear, which in turn made it easier to make decisions, which made it easier to finish sections, which further boosted my confidence. And it might sound counterintuitive, but not worrying about the end result or what my examiners would think was one of the reasons they liked my thesis. So because I was able to make clear and confident decisions, that clarity and confidence carried through into my writing. So we can never have absolute certainty of the outcome. But if you want to actually finish your PhD, then you have to accept that, yeah, someone else might not like the work, but you should do it anyway and do it with commitment and confidence and pride.